You lie beneath a blanket of soft darkness. Not the darkness of fear, the darkness before a storm. The kind that hums gently through the bones of the earth. If you listen, you can almost hear it. A low, ancient breath. The kind that once toppled kingdoms, twisted harvests, and rewrote history with a gust no one thought to record. Tonight, you're stepping into a world where weather wasn't just weather. It was fate. It was a warning. It was a quiet, unseen ruler. And yet, so many of these storms never earned a name. No chronicler bothered. No monk wrote them down. No king commissioned a poem explaining why the skies betrayed him. They simply happened, and the world bent around them. Imagine a medieval town tucked beside a river. The air is thick, unmoving, like the sky is holding its breath. You see women carrying buckets from the well, men hammering patches onto roofs, children chasing a wooden hoop down the street. Nothing suggests the day is special. But then, in the space of a heartbeat, everything changes. A wind rises. Not a dramatic one at first, just a strange, insistent breeze that makes the chickens nervous and rattles the shutters like impatient fingers. By dusk, the breeze becomes a howl. By night, the howl becomes a roar. And the people? They scramble. They pray. They nail planks across doors that were never meant to stand against the weight of sky-driven water. This storm will wash away half the fields, turn roads into rivers, and scatter livestock like leaves. It will also, strangely, open a hidden gate in the earth, a sinkhole that reveals a forgotten burial mound from centuries before. To the terrified villagers, it feels like a sign, a warning, a secret the earth had been forced to release. The storm passes, the mound is sealed again, the year moves on. But for the people who lived through it, nothing feels the same. They swear the wind had a voice. They swear the river turned the color of old coins. And they swear someone, or something, knocked on doors that night. Historians, of course, will never find a single record of it. Weather leaves no fingerprints, except the stories people forget to write down. Now, shift your mind from storm-slashed nights to a warm, stretching, golden summer. But the warmth doesn't fade. It doesn't dim. It doesn't let go. Day after day, the sun hangs heavy over the countryside, like a second god watching the world burn slowly. Wells run low. Bread hardens too fast. Farmers kneel in dust where crops should be. And somewhere, in a monastery tucked among the hills, a single scribe writes in a margin, "The days are too long. The shadows do not behave." No one knows what he meant. Maybe the heat twisted the air and made the walls seem to breathe. Maybe the sun set so red that even the monks whispered of omens. The animals grew restless. Dogs howled at nothing. Birds flew at strange hours. Cattle refused to walk toward the river, as if they sensed something lurking in the shimmering haze. This summer didn't break any kingdoms. It didn't cause riots or famine. It simply lasted. Too long. Long enough to make people dream strangely. Long enough to make mothers keep their children indoors. Long enough that old men sat by windows and muttered, "This isn't right. This isn't how the sky is supposed to feel." But again, no one wrote the summer's name. No one called it a disaster. No one carved it into stone. It faded, like warmth on a stone doorstep at dusk, like the memory of sweat on a quiet neck, a season that overstayed and then slipped into history's blind spots. Let your imagination drift out to sea now, to a coastline swallowed by fog thick enough to taste. Sailors feared fog more than storms. Storms were honest. Storms announced themselves. Fog, though, fog crept. It rolled over the ocean like a wall of sheep's wool, smothering sound, blurring shapes, turning ships into ghosts long before they sank. One forgotten morning, the exact year lost, the exact kingdom unknown. A fleet of small trading vessels disappears into a fog bank just a stone's throw from shore. Fishermen swear they heard oars. They swear they saw lanterns dancing faintly in the mist. Some claim they heard voices calling out. Others say the ocean sounded suddenly too quiet, too calm, as if holding its breath. When the fog lifts, every ship is gone. Not wrecked, not scattered, just missing. No royal scribe documents it. No grieving widow petitions the king. Maybe the sailors were poor. Maybe the vessels were small. Maybe their lives didn't seem historically significant. But for the village that watched them vanish, that fog was a predator, a thief that came on cat's feet and stole an entire morning away. Imagine waking one morning to a silence so heavy it feels like the world forgot to breathe. You push open your wooden shutters, expecting the familiar gray of dawn. Instead, white. Everywhere, impossibly white. Snow covers the roofs, the fields, the river, the very footprints you left last night. The villagers stare at the sky as if it betrayed them, because this winter was not supposed to be here. No clouds the day before, no winds from the north, no omens in the evening smoke. Just a sudden curtain of winter dropped onto a world unprepared. Children cheer, dogs leap wildly, but the adults grow tense. Bread supplies are thin, livestock wasn't sheltered, and the earliest snows are always the most unforgiving. In the fields, old farmers murmur that the air feels too quiet.
that the cold seems to sink differently, as though the world beneath the snow is listening. A monk in a distant abbey writes a single line in his manuscript margins. The silence has weight. He doesn't elaborate. Maybe he didn't know how. But the people who lived through it remember. Not the cold, not the frostbite, but the sound the snow made in the first hour. A soft falling that wasn't falling. A hush that felt like it came from the earth instead of the sky. Weeks later, just as suddenly as it arrived, the winter vanishes. The snow melts in a day. Birdsong returns. The river exhales mist. And no one writes down why.
Now follow the sound of air. Not a storm, not a gale, just wind. Relentless, directionless wind that blows for days on end without rest and without reason. In a coastal town you've never heard of, the people begin to unravel. The wind screams through chimneys, slams open shutters, rattles the bronze church bell, even when nobody is near it. Clothes dry too fast. Bread stales in hours. People's hair stands on end, so full of static it crackles when touched. At night, the wind becomes a chorus. Some swear it laughs. Others swear it whispers their names. A few claim it imitates lost loved ones, calling softly through the window, then fading with the moon. A physician traveling through the region documents nothing about it in his journal, except a strange sketch of spiraling lines and a note underneath. The wind moves like a thing unchained.
Some villagers flee inland. Some hide in wine cellars. Some simply sit in their doorways and let the wind pull at their clothes like an impatient child. Then one morning, as suddenly as it began, the wind stops. Not slows, stops. Total, aching stillness. No explanation, no pattern, no name given. It becomes a story whispered by grandmothers to children too small to understand. A story about the week the air lost its mind. Now step with me into a village surrounded by wetlands and reeds, a place where people know rain intimately. The smell of it, the rhythm of it, the way it seeps into everything. One afternoon, the villagers witness something so bewildering that no one bothers to write it down because no one believes it will be believed. The rain changes direction. Not all at once, just a few droplets at first. Mist rising instead of falling. Spray drifting upward like smoke drawn toward the clouds. Then more and more, until the entire village stands outside, staring at a sky that appears to be sucking the rain back in. The younger folk laugh, calling it a miracle. The elders, though, turn pale. They whisper that it means the sky is sick. that the heavens are exhaling, that the balance of the world has tilted in some unseen way. Animals panic, chickens scream, dogs hide under beds, cows refuse to leave their stalls even when dragged. For an hour, the rain travels upward, as though time has reversed or gravity has grown tired.
Then a sharp crack in the sky, like a rope snapping. Everything stops. The world resets. The rain falls normally again. The villagers go inside and pretend it never happened. The only written record is found years later in a priest's private notebook. The rain rose like souls.
This one is whispered in many places, in many eras, but never officially recorded. A single night when the moon looked off, too large, too orange, too low, too close. People stared at it with unease, feeling their stomachs twist in the same way animals sense earthquakes. Women carrying water dropped their buckets. Men on fishing boats refused to leave harbor. Children refused to sleep unless every candle was lit. Dogs howled, horses paced, owls wouldn't stop screeching. The moon hung there, huge and swollen, as though it had leaned down to inspect the earth more closely than usual.
A midwife from a tiny mountain hamlet scribbles in her diary. If the moon were a face, it was watching us. And then, with no warning at all, its light went out. Not fully, just for a heartbeat, a flicker like a candle guttering, enough to send a jolt through those awake. The next night, the moon returned to normal. No chronicles mention it, no scholars debate it. But the grandchildren of those who saw it still tell the story at winter hearths. You expect summer to feel like a sigh. Warm air, loose soil, a world stretching its limbs after the chill of spring. But this summer never quite arrived. In a valley tucked between green hills, people woke every morning expecting the warmth to finally come. They planted as usual, trusting the sky to remember its duties. But the air stayed cool, not cold, just stubbornly, unnervingly cool. The wheat grew slowly, then paused. Apples turned small and sour. Bees flew low to the ground, their buzzing quieter, their hives sluggish and uncertain. Villagers whispered that the world felt unripened. In the monastery nearby, a monk recorded the oddness in precise script. The sun shines, but the warmth does not follow. Nights brought fog thick enough to swallow sound. Even the river seemed dimmer, as if someone had draped a veil over it. By late August, children began to ask when summer would start. The adults didn't answer. The valley survived, but every story told afterward said the same thing. The year the summer forgot to warm was the year people learned to fear a season's silence.
Travel with me now to a coastal kingdom where storms were familiar, almost friendly, predictable like a neighbor with odd habits. But once there came a storm that refused to settle. It didn't strike one town and pass. It didn't rage in one direction. It moved constantly, deliberately, as though alive. Fishermen at the harbor watched it twist on the horizon, never coming closer, never drifting away, just circling, drifting, stalking the coast like a patient predator. Sailors who returned to port spoke of strange behavior, compasses spinning, birds flying in confused spirals, waves rolling in two directions at once. One ship reported lightning that didn't flash downward, but crawled horizontally across the sky like glowing roots. A captain, veteran of 40 voyages, said quietly to his crew, "The storm has a mind." For 6 days it remained offshore, moving with uncanny intention. Villagers gathered on cliffs each sunset to watch the glowing mass pulse over the sea. On the 7th day, it vanished. Not dispersed, not blown away. Vanished, leaving behind a mirror-flat sea and a handful of fishermen who refused to speak of the things they saw in the storm's final hour. Now move inland to a kingdom known for its mild summers and long, gentle springs. One year, the heat arrived like a punishment. Not scorching, not desert dry. No, this heat was heavy, thick, dense. A heat that felt intelligent, as though it wrapped itself around you on purpose. People claimed the air seemed to press inward, compressing time itself. The sky stayed pale and empty. No clouds, no birds, nothing moving. Bread dough refused to rise. Ale soured quickly. Ink dried in the tips of quills before a sentence could be finished.
The blacksmith closed his forge for the first time, bowing to the heat as if it were a rival he could not defeat. Farmers swore the heat was watching them. Priests refused to ring the bells because the towers were unbearably still. No breeze, no echo, as if sound itself couldn't travel. At night, the heat didn't fade. Instead, it hummed. A low vibration felt in beds, in floors, in the bones of anyone sitting too still. A scholar wrote, "The air refuses to be air." Then, one morning, a wind rose, cool, soft, impossibly welcome. The heat evaporated without fanfare, as though embarrassed by its own presence. The people didn't celebrate. They simply sighed in relief and avoided speaking of the week when the air grew heavy with thought. Now step into a forgotten kingdom where water was life. Springs, rivers, quiet streams twisting between hills. One year, the rain stopped. Completely. Not a drizzle, not a mist, not a dewdrop. The ground cracked
like old pottery. Wells deepened into darkness. Animals grew restless, their tongues parched, their hooves leaving dust clouds behind them. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. As the village riverbed dried, bones appeared. Not animal bones, not recent ones, huge ones. Rib cages taller than men, skulls broad enough to sit on, spines that twisted in strange arcs, unlike any creature the villagers had ever known. Children whispered that giants had died there. Priests insisted they were simply called creatures of God, whose purpose was forgotten. But the elders stayed silent.
The river had always been deep, always mysterious. Now its secrets lay bare under a sun that would not relent. Some travelers came from afar to examine the bones. Others came to pray. A few came simply to stare. But the moment the first rain finally returned, soft at first, then steady, the river swallowed everything again. The bones, the tracks, the memories. And no one mentioned them afterward, as though the drought had merely opened a curtain that was not meant to be touched.
This one comes from the mountain regions, where storms were as familiar as hunger. One autumn, a strange phenomenon began. Thunderstorms rolled in, majestic and dark, clouds heavy with electricity. Lightning flashed, brilliant, white, violent, but there was no sound, no rumble, no crack, no echo trailing behind the light, just silent explosions in the sky. People watched in awe, then in fear. Some crossed themselves, some stared in wonder. A shepherd in the high pastures claimed he felt vibrations in the ground each time the sky lit up.
He wrote in his journal, "The thunder is inside the earth now." Children cried, dogs hid, cows refused to graze. For 3 days, the sky flickered soundlessly. It was thunder without a voice, a storm without a story. And then, as quietly as it arrived, it passed, leaving villagers uneasy whenever lightning flashed for years afterward, waiting always to see if the sky remembered how to make noise.
If you listen closely enough, history has a pulse. It beats through kings and empires, but it also beats quietly through weather, those subtle shifts of wind and warmth that change the fate of entire nations without ever earning a place in the chronicles. Tonight, we wander deeper into those forgotten seasons. Not the storms that roared, but the seasons that whispered and quietly unraveled everything humans tried to build.
There was once a medieval kingdom, small, proud, tucked between mountains, where people waited for spring like a promise from the heavens. But one year, spring simply didn't come. The snow melted reluctantly,
like a guest who didn't want to leave. The rivers stayed thin and sluggish. The fruit trees hesitated, buds trembling but refusing to open. No chronicler gave it a name. No monk wrote a sermon about it, but the people remembered it in their bones. Farmers walked into their fields, kneeling, touching the hard soil, as if they were checking the pulse of a sleeping giant that would not wake. It wasn't a catastrophe. It wasn't dramatic. But everything that year was slightly off. The crops a little shorter, the animals a little thinner, the people a little more tired. When you look back in the records, you won't find any mention of it. But that nameless, stubborn, almost winter began a slow, quiet hunger that would ripple for generations. Then there was the summer that felt unreal. The sky remained bright and pale, as if the sun were shining through a thin layer of silk. It wasn't cold, it wasn't hot, it was simply strange. Travelers wrote confused letters home, describing the light as milk-colored or sad-looking daylight. Some nights the sky seemed to glow faintly, as though the horizon couldn't decide whether it wanted to sleep or stay awake. Was it distant volcanic ash? Atmospheric dust from lands never recorded? Or something else entirely? We'll never know. But it changed everything. Farmers harvested crops that tasted weaker than usual. Bees swarmed in patterns that made no sense at all. And artists painted landscapes with odd, silver-tinted skies that modern scholars cannot explain. It was a summer that didn't feel like summer. A borrowed season, glowing with a kind of stolen light that disappeared as quietly as it arrived. Most seasons give you clues. Autumn usually crackles with wood smoke, color, and cold promises. But this forgotten autumn carried something else, a feeling. Travelers wrote in their journals that the forests were too quiet. Birds migrated earlier than usual, some almost fleeing. Wolves howled on nights when they normally wouldn't. Old women stirring pots over fires would pause and say, "Something is watching." And no one ever knew what they meant, not even them. Leaves fell all at once, as though the trees had agreed to shed their colors in a single gesture. The air tasted different, like iron, like whispers, like the moment before a secret is spoken. And yet, no great disaster followed. No war, no famine, no plague. Just a season filled with warnings that never revealed their purpose. A tension in the air that passed like a sigh you can't explain. But perhaps the strangest season of all was the winter that refused to be winter. Snow arrived late and left early. Lakes never fully froze. Children built snowmen that wilted by afternoon. People should have been relieved, but they weren't. There was something unsettling about warmth in the wrong place.
Something wrong about soft winds where icy ones should howl. Caravans traveled farther than usual. Merchants sold spices in months when they normally hid indoors. And yet, beneath all that convenience, something ancient was shifting. Animals woke from hibernation weeks too early. Plants sprouted in confusion and then died abruptly when a single sharp frost visited like a forgotten bill collector. Historians barely mention this winter. A sentence here, a line there, nothing more. But people felt it deeply. It was as though winter had stepped aside, making room for something unknown, something waiting just beyond the edges of what humans understood.
Weather usually announces itself with noise. Storms crack, winds roar, rain falls like 1,000 tiny drums on rooftops. But some weather arrives quietly, not as an event, but as a change in personality. Tonight, we drift through those forgotten climates that shifted not by storms or seasons, but through moods, subtle, unsettling moods that reshaped human life without a single dramatic headline. There was once a wide, fertile valley known for its gentle breezes. Breezes that carried seeds, carried stories, carried songs from one village to another. Then one year, the air simply stopped moving. Not fully still, not suffocating, just heavy, as if the atmosphere itself were thinking too much. Children ran slower. Laundry refused to dry. Voices sounded quieter, as though the air was swallowing half the sound. People described it as breathing through warm river water. Plants didn't die. Animals didn't panic. The world simply moved slower. It was a climate shift without a storm, without a disaster, without a cause. Just a valley whose breath became softer, longer, stranger. The people remembered it not in journals, but in lullabies, sung with an extra heaviness you can still feel if you listen to the old recordings.
The coastline where the fog stayed for months. Most fog comes to visit, drifting in like a polite guest and leaving before breakfast. But along one ancient coast, the fog arrived one summer morning and simply refused to leave. Fishermen pushed their boats into the gray, vanishing as though swallowed by wool. Lighthouses glowed all day, their beams carving tunnels through the mist. Children played on beaches they could no longer fully see. The fog wasn't dangerous, just persistent, relentless, present. People began measuring time, not by hours, but by how far they could see. Today I can see the rocks. Today I can't see my own hands. Today I saw the horizon for 2 heartbeats, and then it disappeared again. Scholars still debate its cause. A shifting ocean current? A hidden volcanic plume? A rare thermal inversion? But the locals never cared about explanations. They remembered that fog as a living thing, a visitor who overstayed its welcome, but who, strangely, they missed when it finally drifted away. The plateau that became too dry for sound. There is a silence that only high places know, a thin, brittle quiet that sits on the tongue like cool metal. But one year, a plateau in the east became so dry that silence turned into something else. Footsteps made no echo. Conversations seemed to evaporate before reaching the listener. Even the wind sounded tired, its whistle turning into a faint, papery hiss. Travelers described the soundscape as like listening to a memory. The dryness was not dramatic enough to become a famine, nor destructive enough to become a disaster, but it changed the way people felt there. Pilgrims who once climbed the plateau seeking enlightenment began reporting strange dreams, as though the silence was pressing thoughts into their sleep. Some left offerings, water, salt, fruit, to appease whatever ancient spirit they believed had swallowed the sound. No one knows if it helped, but eventually the dryness faded and sound returned. Still, travelers say if you sit there at dawn, you can feel the memory of that quiet dryness waiting beneath the wind.
There was a forest, deep, moss-covered, alive with foxes and lanternflies, where the wind was always cool. Until it wasn't. The change happened slowly. Leaves rustled with warm breaths, mushrooms dried faster than before, streams became lukewarm, nights lost their crisp bite. People tried to explain it. Some said the forest was reacting to too many hunters. Some said a dragon slept beneath it, a playful superstition but comforting in its own way. Others thought it was the world simply shifting its posture, like a giant adjusting in its sleep. The warmth didn't scorch or kill. It just felt displaced, as though summer had wandered into the wrong home.
Artists painted the forest in glowing tones. Poets wrote about trees sweating in their sleep. Herbalists noticed that healing plants grew weaker while poisonous ones thrived. When the cool winds finally returned, they came back one night as suddenly as turning a page. People woke to crisp air pouring through windows like a forgotten blessing. But for years after, locals still whispered, "The forest remembers the warmth." The town that experienced a season of static. No one knows how to describe it properly. Even the diaries struggle. But one year, a small riverside town experienced what people called the season of static. Clothes clung to skin. Cats arched their backs after every touch. Candles flickered when no wind was present. People felt tingles on their hands when they brushed against wooden tables. The river itself occasionally sparked faint blue glimmers when oars dipped into it at night.
not bright enough to be dangerous, just strange enough to make rowers whisper prayers.
Children loved it. Adults feared it. Scholars ignored it. And weather records never mention it. But ask anyone whose grandmother came from that town, and they'll tell you the static was real. It lasted 68 days, then ended, just like that, as if the sky exhaled and returned everything to normal. Some things in history aren't meant to be solved, only remembered, even if official history pretends they never happened. There are storms everyone remembers, the ones carved into chronicles in thick ink, the ones sung by frightened monks and weeping travelers. And then there are the others, the quiet ones, the ones that slipped beneath the attention of kings and chroniclers, leaving no thunderous record, no carved memorial, nothing at all except the subtle way they nudged the path of history. Tonight, we drift into one such moment. The year that left almost no trace, no famous famine, no named disaster. And yet, the world shifted all the same. The silent summer. Imagine walking through a countryside where everything feels slightly off. The sun rises, but its warmth is thin. The mornings carry a strange coolness, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Not enough to frighten anyone, not enough to ruin crops outright, just enough to change them. Peasants shrug and say, "Strange weather this year," then return to their fields. But the wheat grows slower. The hay is a little less dense. The fruit is just a bit more tart than usual. No doom, no panic. Just a season that seems to breathe differently. And because no one thinks it worth recording, it slips between the cracks of history. Yet deep in this silent summer, 100 tiny consequences ripple outward. A merchant earns slightly less profit and decides against a long-distance journey. A young monk stays in his abbey instead of traveling to study abroad. A noble delays a wedding by a month, and two houses that might have joined never do. The weather didn't break the world, it simply gentle tilted it. Picture a village market. Every stall has a slightly smaller pile of produce. Not disastrously small, just enough to make people cautious. A fisherman looks at the colder than usual stream and mutters, "Strange currents this year," as he brings home fewer trout. The baker raises prices by a single copper coin. The brewer dilutes his ale just a little more. The cloth merchant decides to reuse last year's dye vat. No one starves, no one riots. Life simply becomes a touch more restrained. And because of that, a traveler passing through decides it's not worth buying supplies here. He changes course. He takes a different road.
And because he takes a different road, he meets different people or avoids others entirely. A life veers a few inches to the left. Weather shapes history, not only through devastation, but through the subtle pressure of almost nothing.
Animals know first. Long before humans notice anything, animals do. The birds migrate just a little earlier. Cattle grow thicker coats by instinct. Shepherds find their sheep restless at dusk, quick to gather together as if expecting frost. A miller's dog refuses to drink from the river in the early morning. The miller jokes that the dog has gotten picky, but the truth is, the water's temperature shifted by a degree, and the dog felt it before anyone else. Farmers sense something in the air, but can't name it. They say the wind feels different on the skin, as if the season itself is uncertain, forgetting its lines in a play it has rehearsed for centuries. Still, no chronicler writes it down. What historian would ever copy a manuscript page titled, "This year felt a bit strange"?
The traveler with no story. Every village has heard tales of storms that devoured ships, snows that swallowed armies, winds that toppled towns. But no one tells stories of average weather, except the traveler. Imagine him walking from town to town with a slow, ambling gait, cloak dusted with early frost. He notices it all. The fruits that ripen late, the creeks running clearer and colder, the faint hush in the evenings as the wind dies early, the inns that burn slightly more firewood, even though winter is months away. He collects these tiny details the way others collect relics.
If someone had listened to him, truly listened, they might have realized something unusual was unfolding. But the traveler is just a traveler, someone always on the road, always telling stories, always exaggerating. No one believes a man like that, so his observations drift like smoke, lost with the turning of seasons.
When weather changes plans. This silent, unnamed year affects nothing dramatically, but everything subtly. A night postpones training because the training grounds are strangely muddy for midsummer. A monastery delays its harvest festival because the apples haven't sweetened yet. A wandering musician stays longer in a town because the nights are chilly and her hands ache. These are not disasters. These are the tiny bends in the river of time. A marriage postponed, a journey altered, a letter sent too late because storms, gentle, unthreatening storms, keep dampening the parchment. By the end of the year, life looks mostly the same, but shifted by 100 quiet decisions. History never notices, but lives do. And so the year fades. No scribe writes it down. No monk illuminates its memory with gold leaf. No chronicler bothers to remark on a summer that was merely odd. The year without footprints disappears into the past. But if you could walk back through the centuries, you might notice that every life it touched, softly, quietly, imperceptibly, was nudged into a slightly different story. A world changed not by roaring storms, but by a whisper of weather too subtle to name.
Most storms leave scars, broken branches, flood marks on stone, songs composed by frightened villagers. But then there are storms that vanish, storms that pass through a landscape and leave nothing behind but a rumor, a shiver, a single sentence in a forgotten manuscript written by a monk who seemed almost unsure he should write it at all. Tonight, we explore one such storm, a storm so strange that only one chronicler ever bothered to record it. And even then, half the ink looks hesitant.
The Chronicle of Brother Albin. In a monastery tucked between mountains and mist, a monk named Brother Albin kept a journal. Not the official chronicle, no gold leaf, no authority, no grand declarations, just a personal notebook, a place where he wrote feelings, oddities, moments he couldn't explain. And on a quiet page, somewhere after a list of herbs he intended to dry for winter, he wrote, "A wind came that carried no scent, no warmth, no cold. It moved, but the leaves did not." That was all. One line. No date, no follow-up, no commentary from other monks. Just a strange wind that stirred the air, but not the world around it.
The villagers who felt nothing and something. 5 miles away, in a village at the foot of the woods, people did not report a storm. There was no rainfall, no thunder, no lightning. Yet a handful of villagers remembered a night when they woke abruptly just after midnight with a peculiar sensation. The sensation of being observed. Later, they described it differently. Like a cold draft across the soul. Like hearing your name whispered, but no voice speaking it. Like waking from a dream you can't remember, but you know wasn't yours. The livestock did not stir. The dogs did not bark. But several lanterns in the village guttered, flickered, and went out, even though there was no wind.
Brother Albin didn't write another line about the event, but one of the monks who worked in the orchard left a note in a margin months later. The trees were silent that night, too silent. Even when we felt the wind, the branches did not sway. Imagine standing beneath a canopy of leaves, feeling a breeze brush across your face, but above you, nothing, not a flutter, not a quiver, as if the wind existed for people alone, passing through them, but not the world.
The next morning, shepherds noticed something odd. Their sheep would not graze facing east. The dogs avoided the same direction. Even the crows circled the western fields, ignoring the eastern ridge entirely, a ridge they normally perched on every morning. To the villagers, it felt as though something had passed across the eastern horizon, something unseen, something the animals understood more clearly than humans. It wasn't fear, it wasn't panic, it was avoidance, a quiet, deliberate refusal.
The storm that left nothing behind. There were no toppled trees, no wet soil, no broken roof tiles, no thunder, no rainfall. And yet, for days afterward, people felt shifted, a little on edge, a little sleepless, a little as though the night had whispered something to them and they just barely missed hearing it. Travelers passing through the valley complained of strange dreams. Some said they felt strangely emotional. Others felt strangely calm. No two experiences were the same. It was a storm that touched each person differently, but left no physical trace anywhere at all. Why only one chronicle? Here is the strangest part. Dozens of monasteries kept weather records. Dozens of monks tracked storms, droughts, frosts, and seasonal shifts. But only Brother Albin wrote anything. Historians later asked, did the storm only pass by his monastery? Did other monks experience it but choose not to record something so uncanny? Or did Brother Albin simply notice what others ignored? A breeze that moved the spirit, but not the body. A storm that existed in sensation, but not in sight. A weather event that may not have been weather at all.
The storm that wasn't a storm. Years later, the villagers remembered that night the same way you remember a dream, fuzzy around the edges, real in the middle, meaningful somehow, even if you can't say why. Brother Albin's page now sits in a museum, the ink faded, the parchment thin. Most visitors walk past it, but if you stood before it, quietly, alone, you might feel that same draft Brother Albin described. Not cold, not warm, not a gust at all. Just a presence that brushes through the centuries, nudging your thoughts like a fingertip on still water.
History often remembers what shouts the loudest. Wars, famines, floods, blazing storms. But tonight, we linger in the quiet, in the weather that slipped through the cracks, that nudged lives without leaving footprints, that shaped events softly, silently, invisibly. This is the final whisper, the last secret of forgotten skies.
The fog that stayed a season. Imagine a fog so persistent that it lingered for weeks, covering the river valley like a pale blanket. The sun never fully pierced it. The moon glowed faintly through it. Sounds were muted, birdsong softened into ghostly echoes. Farmers went about their work cautiously. Children played cautiously. Even the river seemed to hesitate in its flow. No official record exists. No song was sung. No official disaster was declared. Yet the fog reshaped life. People walked slower. Conversations stretched longer. Decisions were delayed. Journeys postponed. Marriages planned for a brighter day. A subtle ripple, nearly invisible, but undeniably felt.
The wind that whistled only at night. In another forgotten corner of the world, there came a wind that only blew after dusk. It carried no rain, no debris, no threat. It only whispered. Through the village streets, it curled around chimneys, sneaked under doors, and stirred the hair of sleepers as they lay in bed. Some claimed it brought dreams, vivid, strange dreams. Others said it carried memories, like the past breathing softly into the present. The wind did not harm. It did not move trees or topple fences. It only reminded people that the world was alive, even when it seemed still. And just like that, it faded one morning, leaving only the memory of its gentle presence.
There is a story, told by very few, of a rain that fell without clouds. It was quiet, gentle, almost shy. No thunder to announce it, no darkness to cloak it. Just soft droplets touching leaves, rooftops, and faces. People left doors open, thinking it a trick. Animals paused, confused. Children ran through it, laughing, as adults watched with wonder. It ended as suddenly as it began. No one knew where it came from. No one recorded its passage. And yet, for a moment, the world felt magical and perfectly unremarkable at the same time.
All these forgotten weathers, the silent summer, the odd winter, the storm no one recorded, the fog that never lifted, they leave a lesson, not in history books, not in textbooks, not in any formal record, but in human hearts. Patience, observation, listening, noticing the subtle shifts that do not shout, but shape life in ways we cannot always see. The people who lived through them didn't celebrate, didn't write epics. They adapted. They felt. They remembered quietly, as if keeping a secret with the wind itself.
Now, centuries later, we walk through these stories like wandering through a half-forgotten garden. We cannot know the full impact of these weather events, and perhaps we never will. But they remind us, history is not only what is shouted, but also what whispers. And sometimes, the quietest moments shape the world the most.